So, after 4 years of living in Moscow and attending Christ Church, what do I think of Douglas Wilson now? I confess at this point that that title is clickbait, because I love the thought of haters and slanderers of Douglas Wilson clicking on this and stepping into this space. So, spoiler, this is going to be, pretty much a paean of praise to Douglas Wilson. And let those who accuse me of being a cultist do what they will below in the comment section. You're welcome to. I don't imagine they'll be hanging out long, though. I do want to say, though, that a couple of things before I get started. One is, this is not going to be weird, y'all. I do think that a lot of people who really like Doug Wilson can be a little weird in their responses and thoughts about him. It's a little weird that I'm making this video, I suppose, because I actually am beginning to work with him a little bit, which is new. I am primarily making this video because of thoughts I've been having while reading for Canon Press and reading a lot of Douglas Wilson, including what I would consider Doug Wilson B-sides, thinking of the old albums. So not besides, B-sides, like the B-sides of an album. There's another video I want to make about Christ Church. And so I may actually go ahead and do a short series. So if you see 2, 3, 4 videos come out in a row that are about Christ Church, be not surprised. There, you've been warned. So Kimberly and I actually moved here the first time back in 02 or 03. I think it was 03. And my eldest daughter was born out here. We were out here for a short time, a year and a half, and then we went back to Florida. But it really was a very formative time. We had come out here because there was an opportunity for me to go to school, but mostly we came out for the church to learn. One of the things that I've commented to people in the past is that theologically, like syllogistically, we didn't learn a whole lot. I was already an avid reader, and we were both active theologically and talking about things. We did come for community and to be around like-minded Christians. We learned a ton. It just wasn't syllogistic. We saw things modeled. And one of the things we observed even then was how meek and mild Douglas Wilson is. Because people get all in a bother, all in a dither about him, and he speaks firmly, no question about it. But he's a kind dude. And so we would have occasion, being in the CREC elsewhere, or not being in the CREC because we moved quite a bit. Doug Wilson would come up, and it often was relevant in a conversation to say he's a sweet, kind guy. I think the phrase "kind eyes" was used more than once. So because of our first time here, without ever having had a real conversation with him, I'm still not sure I've ever had a real conversation with him. We came to really love the man. And so I'm going to talk about that quite a bit in the next two parts of the video. I have three parts in mind. So coming to this gig that I have with Canon, with doing all this reading, I've read a bunch of guys. I love to read Lightheart. His books on I love literature. I like reading about literature more than I like reading about theology. Read some great books. I've read a lot of Doug Wilson stuff. But as you can imagine, many of his hot bestsellers, the ones that everyone wants to read, like his family books, so influential. And in my ministry to Brazil, those are probably the most important points of connection that Brazilian Reformed Christians have, as those books on the family. I've ended up reading a lot of books that are not on that, that top tier, not S tier Wilson. And a lot of books that I hadn't read before. Books that, Confessions of a Food Catholic, I think it's called. Or Let the Stones Cry Out, which was a collection of the emails he wrote to the congregation about preparing for building a church building. I didn't read those emails when they were coming out. Anyway, so I've been reading these B-sides, basically. And as I was reading all of these B-sides, like Clean Water, Red Wine, Fresh Bread? No. Broken Bread. Of course, Broken Bread. Goodness. Come and Welcome to Jesus Christ, which is a collection of a few years of his little exhortations before communion. These B-sides, if you will, reflect even more one of the most attractive things about him and his writing, and one that I think that particularly like blog readers don't necessarily see or see as much of, which is joy. Here's the thing about people who are joyful in combat. They're joyful people, right? You can't be joyful in the fight if you're not joyful on a Tuesday. And I mentioned how in being under his pastoral care the first time around, we were really struck by his kindness. In a lot of these other writings, these other books, there's just so much kindness so evident. And it's because of the audience. Like Clean Water, Red Wine, Broken Bread is for people who are thinking about becoming Christians, struggling with conversion, asking fundamental, basic questions. Or, these emails that he sent out about the church building, just very basic, kind, loving stuff for the people, for his people. So this kindness, this joy really comes out. And as I'm reading all these B-sides, I started having the thought. So when the first time we lived here, when we left, I had the thought, there's definitely a little bit of Geneva going on here, back in 2003. And it was very embryonic. It's still, in a lot of ways, embryonic. 40, 50 years is not that much time. When I left, my thought was, the legacy of this place is going to be as a footnote. These people who are working in Moscow, building churches in Moscow, they're going to be a footnote. That's what I think is likely. This is a great work, and the Holy Spirit is blessing it, and they're going to be a footnote. I had an acquaintance who several years back, wrote a book about the Mercersburg theology. Probably the biggest figure to come out of that movement 100 years ago was Philip Schaff. I think you can actually see, there it is, right there, my Philip Schaff books on the creeds. And, reading that, it was striking to consider the downstream effect of a movement that is basically forgotten. And that is what I imagined, that what was happening here would influence people who would make a mark in the history of the church in a much bigger way 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And I suppose that's still on the table. Being here the second time, and also thinking about the figure of Douglas Wilson, I am not so sure of that anymore. I think I think that there actually could be. I mean, the way so many in the country and around the world, but in the country, are now looking to Moscow and seeing what an influential figure Douglas Wilson is becoming on the national scene, makes me think, well, maybe there is an actual Geneva thing happening here, where the influence is the work itself, not the work it works upon another greater laborer or other greater laborers. It's important to me, for reasons that I'll unpack later on, that people understand that what's happening around the country, what's happening in the CREC, what's happening in Moscow at Christ Church is far, far bigger than Douglas Wilson. To put it in a way that may unsettle you, it's fine if Douglas Wilson is not here tomorrow. That's a testament to his and others' labor. There is so much going on, so much that is potent. So that being said, one of the big reasons I think that the Geneva-ness of what's happening in this town could perdure is that I think Wilson is more than a great pastor and effective communicator. That's probably what my opinion has been for the majority of the time I've been aware of him. I think he's one of the greats, and it's the B-signs that are convincing me of that. It's, getting to know his thinking sideways, like when he's talking about a building or when he's talking to new Christians, and wishing that more people knew that Douglas Wilson. He is extremely prolific. And I honestly could see him becoming a C.S. Lewis type. And unlike C.S. Lewis, there is an ecclesiastical movement associated with him and others, but with him. So I think there's some legitimate greatness here. So for the second part of the video, and yes, this is a long video. I hope you're wandering around, you have your earphones on, you're treating this like a podcast. I wish people knew, right? And this is another thought that keeps bouncing around in the old cranium as I read these B-sides. I wish people knew what a cool dude he is. And I suppose I wish that for love's sake, not for the sake of the love that others would show, although I suppose that's in there, but for the sake of my love for him. You want people to know, to understand the things you love. I mean, there are the pagan haters, whatever. But the Christians who have hot, spicy, hard takes don't know. They just don't know. And that's not true of all of them. And I'm not saying that they are innocent, by the way. But a lot of them are guilty of not wanting to do their due diligence. So here's the last thing I want to talk about. I consider the man a spiritual father. And I think a lot of people do. And that's probably very evident by my language throughout this video. But I want people to understand a certain thing. Not just about how I feel toward him, considering him as a spiritual father, but in considering themselves. I think with any spiritual leader, there are a lot of things that we lack in the modern church, right? Like no elders, no pastors in any American churches expect to be obeyed, for example, right? So put that to the side a little bit. I do think that there are a lot of people who are fans of Douglas Wilson, who have been influenced by Douglas Wilson, who perhaps have even come to Moscow, who think of him as a spiritual leader, perhaps as a spiritual father, and who basically fanboy, who basically promote and cheer on anything he says. And I wonder if people would do that with their own fathers, right? And I know that some people have no fathers, some people have bad relationships with their fathers, but I'm talking about a good relationship with your father. I was talking to my kids about this recently, my grown-up kids. Obedience changes over the years, but, like if my father asked me to do something, I would do it simply because he asked, right? It's not about having to obey, it's about honoring. So we don't honor our leaders, right? This is I made that comment about pastors and elders not ever expecting to be obeyed. They have no real authority, and I think a lot of that has to do with our our fatherlessness. But I'm going to start getting off on a tangent here. I really want to encourage people who are big fans of Douglas Wilson, who are fans of what's going on at Christ Church or with Canon or in the CREC more broadly, to grow up into being their own men. We imitate our fathers in our youth, but our fathers should want us to grow beyond them. And I would even say that, if you're living well and following after Christ, you are going to do a lot of things that your dad doesn't really understand, right? Just generationally, or the things that you're dealing with, doesn't really understand, doesn't see the importance of it, isn't sure why you did that. And it even can come down to personality. You just have a different personality. A few years ago, I made a video making fun of Douglas Wilson and Toby Sumpter. And the number of messages I got from people who hate Doug Wilson, thinking that I was suddenly on their side, astounded me. I mean, I still don't really see, it's such a narrowness of thinking. I still don't really see why people assumed that about me. And I think a lot of that was the video was being shared by people who didn't normally watch my channel, so they lacked the context. But still, there was nothing vituperative in it. It was actually, I think it was kind of funny. But people think in those ways, right? Either rah, rah, rah all the way, or boo, boo, boo all the way. And, we don't do that with our fathers, and we shouldn't do that with, our pastors either, spiritual fathers. In a sense, we grow beyond them. Now, it is very easy for me to not just show, but feel a profound sense of honor toward Douglas Wilson. As in, I want to honor him as one would honor a father. I also am under no illusion about my own greatness. But I'm also going to be Joffrey, right? And if I think American Milk and Honey was kind of I actually disagree with it fundamentally. It's kind of meh. I'm going to say that, right? And it's rhetorically and ethically poor of us to think that is somehow not being on the team or not honoring. So I want to encourage, I think I made a video a while back about, the danger of following online pastors. When your parents feed you, they want you to grow big and strong. And big and strong people do their own things in the Lord. And so I guess that's what I really want to encourage. So in this video, I've talked about how, there's a Douglas Wilson that a lot of people just don't know, right? The sweetheart of a man, the kind, very pastoral guy. I've talked about, there are a lot of B-sides out there that I'd encourage you to read, where, you'll sort of get to see sideways some of the things that he talks about in his more popular works. I've talked about, what I think is his greatness. I think his name will resound for a while. And then finally, I talked about thinking all of these things, but still growing up into your own maturity. Right? I mean, you've got things to do. Okay? And of course, we learn through imitation. And we can imitate books and follow ideas and follow practices. And I highly endorse that to you, and I still do that with many. Right? Many that I look up to, while being aware that many are looking up to me. Right? I would not want my children to look at me and say, oh, Dad wants me to be like Grandpa, or Dad wants me to be like Douglas Wilson. I bear the burden of telling my children, be like me. Although I've also said to my children, don't be like me in this regard. But that's the burden we must carry. And we must carry it joyfully, and we must carry it earnestly and eagerly. So we have to mature into ourselves. At some point, we have to take hold of our own identity in Christ. So I guess that's the last thing I want to encourage. Yeah, I've been sort of cavitating up in there the thoughts that I've put out in this video. I hope it hasn't been too rambly. I'd love to hear in the comments what your experience with Douglas Wilson has been, and how you react to what I've said. Maybe other people who have influenced your spiritual life. And I suppose I'll leave it at that. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And the peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pension.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!